Good evening and welcome to this week's show with Focus Israel. Before we go to Paul up in Jerusalem, where he will update us on the worrying developments around the Temple Mount, events that now many refer to as the possible Third Intifada. But first, some short news for you. After the Aftonbladet affair, which we've spoken about before, and the refusal of the Swedish foreign minister Bildt to distance himself from the false accusations of the speculative organ thefts. Now, Israel's foreign minister Ayalon urges Jerusalem to re-examine the relations with Stockholm. To Ynet News, he says, quote, "It's a shame that a person who refused to respond to the blood libel against Israel has now come out in praise of the unprofessional report," unquote. And the report, of course, is the controversial Goldstone report concerning the war with Gaza this winter. The controversies also concerning President Obama's Peace Prize last week keeps growing, even so in Israel. Across the political spectra, reports are being expressed with a surprise that he got nominated only 12 days after entering the White House. And even before he held any of his famous speeches he is now so frequently quoted from. Both in Haaretz and Jerusalem Posts, writers are now speculating in two possible outcomes. One is, will it weaken Mr. Obama's position to strike militarily against Iran, if so needed? And the second one is, Israel could be pressured by Obama to make dangerous concessions with the Palestinians. That was all from me today, and now, Paul, over to you in Jerusalem.
Thank you, Frederick. The Jewish high holidays, which are national holidays here in Israel, ended this past weekend. As we reported previously on Focus Israel, Jews visiting the Temple Mount once again came under attack by Muslims about 3 weeks ago. The unrest culminated this past weekend, and calm has now been restored by Israeli police. I recently spoke about this with Yossi Klein Halevi, a senior research fellow at the Shalem Center, an academic research institute here in Jerusalem. Here are some excerpts from that interview. The calm seems to have been restored in East Jerusalem, but the rhetoric from Arab leaders both inside and outside of Israel remains inflammatory, putting the blame squarely on Israel and calling on Muslims to defend the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Why do you think this is happening right now?
Well, I think we need a little bit of background because this has been an ongoing theme in Arab-Israeli relations for close to a century. In fact, even before the State of Israel existed. The Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, was always used as a weapon against Jewish presence here. So, for example, in 1929, what could be called the first Intifada, the first real Intifada, this a series of Arab massacres of Jews at that time, was provoked by the Mufti, the main Palestinian Muslim leader, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who later became an ally of Hitler and spent World War II years in Berlin. And he called for a holy war to defend the Temple Mount. And the pretext for that was that Jews were blowing the shofar at the Western Wall below, which of course is what Jews do, and this was on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, on the high holidays. So there's a certain amount of hysteria that's been involved in this issue from the very beginning, a very large amount of disingenuousness, and that's really coming into play once again in our time. We're hearing continuous calls throughout the Muslim world to save the Temple Mount, as if there were any attempt on the part of the Israeli government to actually destroy the Dome of the Rock, or to threaten the Muslim presence. It is a complete lie. It is an invention. And the proof of that is that almost all of the leading Jewish religious authorities forbid Jews from praying on the Temple Mount. There are all kinds of religious reasons for that, but there isn't this massive sense of, even on the part of religious Jews in Israel, of pressing against the Temple Mount, this tremendous longing to return. There is a longing for the Temple Mount, but that longing is delayed until the coming of the Messiah. That's very clearly an expression of normative Judaism. So the Temple Mount is used by jihadist leaders to whip up sentiment. It is the surest way of bringing out rioters into the streets. And there are those who have been trying to reignite an intifada in this country unsuccessfully for the last years. And given the fact that conditions are improving in the West Bank, for example, economic conditions in the last year, so extremists need a pretext. And that pretext, unfortunately, over and over again, is the Temple Mount. And the Palestinian people needs to decide between its two options. It has two very clear options. There's Gaza on the one hand. Gaza is run by a genocidal jihadist movement whose stated goal is the destruction of the Jewish state and the murder of its people. And then you have the West Bank. And the West Bank in the last couple of years has gradually been moving toward more and more normalcy. Beginnings of some form, one could even say cautiously, of prosperity in certain areas. So these are the two alternatives that the Palestinian people face. If you opt for peaceful coexistence with Israel, that will produce one result. If you opt for holy war against Israel, that will produce a very different kind of result.
The Temple Mount that you see here behind me has thus always been the focus of the conflict, the most disputed piece of real estate in the world. This is where it all started. Already in Genesis chapter 22, when Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, he came to the place where I'm now standing, and he saw the place in the distance. For closer to 4,000 years, people of different religions have considered this to be a place where you meet God. Often we just see the fights that erupt over it, but it is important to remember that more than anything, this is still a place where people of different religions sincerely seek God. That's all from Focus Israel today. See us again next week.